Good early afternoon, everyone. It is April 10th, 2026. I'm JJ Hastings. My original News You Need to Know video today had a little snafu, so I had to refilm it, and so I do apologize this is coming out a little bit late because of that. But regardless, let's jump right in. So, going to get through a lot of headlines this Friday, starting with the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics reported this morning that the Consumer Price Index increased by 0.9% in March, bringing this year's year-over-year inflation rate to 3.3%. Now, this is a significant jump from February, which was 2.4%. This spike is almost entirely driven by energy costs, which rose almost 11% in a single month, specifically gasoline prices surging by 21.2%. Economists note that this is the first clear data point showing how the ongoing US-Iran conflict and associated energy shocks are impacting domestic consumer prices. So this is really the first time you're seeing that domestic cost of war. Historically, energy shocks from the Middle East lead to what we call creeping inflation, where transportation costs eventually end up raising the price of groceries and consumer goods, effectively acting as a regressive tax on communities and low-income families. Now, USPS, the U.S. Postal Service, has notified federal budget officials that it is temporarily suspending employer contributions to the federal employee retirement system. Facing a severe cash crunch, the Postal Board of Governors is also seeking to raise the price of a first-class Forever stamp from 78 cents to 82 cents. While current retirees are not expected to see an immediate impact, officials warn the agency could run out of cash by February 2027 without interventions. This is a canary in the coal mine for federal infrastructure. By opting for a cash conservation plan, the USPS is signaling that its current business model is unsustainable under current legislative constraints. For you, this points to a potential decline in service reliability and a shift towards privatization of the mail, a service that rural communities rely on still for prescriptions and legal documents. In Artemis news, NASA's Artemis 2 mission is scheduled to conclude today with a splashdown in the Pacific Ocean off the coast of San Diego at around 5:07 p.m. Pacific, if all goes well. Now, this mission, which launched on April 2nd, saw 4 astronauts become the first humans to journey around the moon in over 50 years. The Orion spacecraft return will be broadcast live via NASA's official channels. It'll probably be all over YouTube and also through their partnership airing on Netflix. Now, I have a follow-up story posted on the channel pinned today. You can go and watch after this one about some angry pushback I got to my coverage of the Artemis 2 moon launch by folks claiming that it never happened. So if you want to hear more about that, you can go ahead and watch that video. Now moving into geopolitics, in a move seen as a potential de-escalation of regional hostilities, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu authorized direct negotiations with Lebanon on Thursday. Now these talks are expected to take place in Washington, according to reports, and aim to disarm Hezbollah militants and establish formal relations. This shift follows a period of intense Israeli bombardment in Beirut. I discussed yesterday in my news stories over 100 bombings in southern Lebanon by Israel in just a 10-minute period. And this occurs against the backdrop of that fragile 2-week ceasefire I'm following here on the channel in that broader US-Iran conflict. This is historically significant if it happens and it comes together, because Israel and Lebanon have technically been in a state of war since 1948 and typically use mediated messages through third parties rather than direct negotiations. This could be a show that regional exhaustion from the Iran conflict is forcing even the most hardened adversaries into considering a formal buffer zone to prevent a broader collapse of that current ceasefire. In Hormuz news, the White House has labeled Iran's continued closure of the Strait of Hormuz as completely unacceptable. Trump floated the idea of charging tolls for passage through the vital waterway. I covered that in the story yesterday, while Iranian leadership has asserted total control. The standoff persists despite a tenuous ceasefire with the United States demanding that that route be reopened, quote, without any limitations. Hormuz matters. We keep talking about it because 20 to 30% of the world's total oil consumption passes right through just this narrow strait. Even a temporary closure or a toll system threatens the global supply chain, meaning that regardless of domestic policy here, American gas prices are currently tethered to the diplomatic success or failure of these specific negotiations. And Vice President J.D. Vance departed from Joint Base Andrews this morning for Islamabad, Pakistan, where he will lead the U.S. negotiating team in peace talks with Iran. Vance expressing hope for a positive outcome, but warning that the U.S. would not be played by Iranian negotiators. Meanwhile, Iran's parliament speaker has demanded a ceasefire in Lebanon and the release of blocked assets as preconditions for those talks. Now, the Hindu and Reuters reporting that Vance was chosen for this role specifically because of his recently vocal skepticism of forever wars. His presence is meant to signal to Iran that the administration is very serious about this total withdrawal by sending a sitting U.S. vice president, but his language about warning them not to play with the United States, his general demeanor of this administration, indicates that America First posture might not allow them to accept a peace deal that doesn't include significant Iranian concessions on things like nuclear development. So a continuing and breaking story today to watch. And then some legal news. U.S. District Judge Paul Friedman ruled on April 9th that the Department of Defense is violating a court order to restore press access to the Pentagon. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's team had implemented new rules requiring escorts for all reporters and closing media offices, moves the judge described as an attempt to evade a previous ruling that found the administration's credentialing policy unconstitutional. Now, this is a landmark First Amendment battle regarding what we think of as viewpoint discrimination. By attempting to control which reporters get access based on their willingness to sign restrictive contracts, or even worse, a willingness to deny fact or refuse to report on true, verifiable global news, the Pentagon is testing legal boundaries of executive power over the public's right to know, our First Amendment, and our right to a free press during active military conflicts. Now, I can fully understand, to give an opinion for a second, the need to protect sensitive military information in times of war. However, when the president is on Truth Social, spreading war rhetoric, war plans, and threats to other nations, as well as the White House's official social media posting videos of people like Pete Hegseth in the war room having meetings about strategy, where you can clearly see in the background entire maps of Iran and the Middle East plotting out locations of bases and other things that are being shared on the global internet. It makes it a little more difficult to feel like you have a right to deny access to the press in those circumstances. And then the Environmental Protection Agency has announced proposed revisions to regulations governing the disposal of coal combustion residuals, which you probably know as coal ash, into landfills. The proposal seeks to provide relief for dewatering structures and narrow the scope of management unions. Now, this is a move that critics argue weakens protections against groundwater contamination from toxic heavy metals that can be found in power plant waste. So coal ash contains heavy metals like arsenic and lead, which can then leach into the water table. This rollback matters because it shifts the financial burden of environmental cleanup from the utility companies or corporations doing that toxic dumping to your local municipality, which now come up with the funds to monitor your well water for contamination. And in our final story, for a second consecutive year, Trump administration budget proposal calls for total elimination of federal funding for tribal colleges and universities. This move would force institutions to close within a year and constitutes a violation of both federal trust and treaty responsibilities. This is not discretionary aid, but a treaty obligation, payment for land and resources ceded to the U.S. government. I'm JJ Hastings, and I'll see you in the next one.